Okay, so let's see here. So next I wanted to hand it over to Seth Jacobson. He is the Senior Director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Social Impact, and he's going to talk more about our goals for the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Liliana, and welcome everyone. As Liliana mentioned, my name is Dr. Seth Jacobson, Senior Director for the Center for Civic Engagement and Social Impact at Westchester University. For those of you unfamiliar with our center, we provide community-based learning opportunities through which students can develop the skills, knowledge, and competencies necessary to participate effectively in democratic life as agents of positive social change. So along with the Dowdy Multicultural Center and the other co-sponsors that Liliana mentioned, it's really a pleasure to be co-sponsoring such an important discussion this afternoon. Discussions like this one are consistent with the university's values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access to learning, and the university's mission to develop students that are able to collaborate with others to solve problems and to address societal needs, and to develop graduates that are able to graduate to engage inclusively in a diverse society. This discussion in particular will enable us as a community of educators and as a community of learners to better understand this important topic that affects the lives, well-being, and success of so many members of our community. As Liliana mentioned, there are so many individuals that are really impacted by this particular topic, including our institutions writ large. I do have to state that the views of the panelists do not necessarily reflect the official views and positions of the university. The panelists were selected based on their involvement or expertise in matters pertaining to post-secondary access and success for undocumented students. We're here today, as Liliana mentioned, to learn from them and to engage them in constructive dialogue and civic discourse. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Linda Stevenson, to introduce the panelists.
Sorry, need to unmute. It's nice to be with you here today. Thank you all for coming. And just to start out, so we're going to begin with one of our students who I'm proud to say is a political science major with a minor in Spanish and computer science. Mitzi Colin Lopez is a senior, will be wrapping up her studies this year. And she has done some amazing work on the campus and as well in service learning opportunities and internships with some local nonprofits, including CASA, of which you will hear more about Layla in a moment, and CASA Pennsylvania, and then the Nationality Service Center, which is based in Center City, Philadelphia, currently, which strives to empower and provide a more just future for all immigrants. So she'll be doing some really interesting work there this semester. Our second panelist is the Pennsylvania lead organizer for CASA, Layla Martin Garcia, who, as part of CASA, works in mobilizing the immigrant community and working families. Layla's leadership catalyzes the power of people to make positive changes in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, a battleground referring to our 2020 election. And she has worked with thousands of families as an advocate for Puerto Rican equity, climate justice, and immigrant justice. Layla brings to us with her knowledge base of all the community work that she's done, also a Master of Arts in International Relations, Security and Development from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, where she has also done work in conflict management from around the globe. Next on the panel, we have our District Director and Senior Advisor for the Office of the Pennsylvania State Senator Judy Swank, Mr. Thomas Gombar. Thank you so much for being with us today. Mr. Gombar attended the Pennsylvania State University, one of our rivals at the Berks campus, was a university scholar, and then graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science, bravo, from Alrainier College. He then went on to complete a master's of public administration at Kutztown, another great Pashi school, and has since been employed as a part of the Senate of Pennsylvania for a number of years. So he previously worked with the Senator Michael Opaque as a legislative assistant, also included administrative roles there as the district office manager and chief of staff. And he's currently serving with it as the district director and senior advisor for Senator Judy Swank. And in addition to his managerial duties, he has been responsible for many policy issues related to banking, environment, transportation, higher ed, our focus today, local government, and economic development. Mr. Gumbar's 33-year career in state government has focused heavily on constituent service and advocacy, and he is particularly passionate about helping students attain their goals through post-secondary education. He currently serves as the legislative designee to the PASHI Board of Governors and has previously served as the board of directors for both the Pennsylvania Higher Education and National Higher Ed Foundation. Thank you so much, Mr. Gumbar, for being with us today. And last but not least is Ms. Tanya Garcia, who is the Deputy Secretary and Commissioner for the Post-Secondary and Higher Education Committee of the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Wonderful to have you with us today. And her position, Dr. Garcia oversees long-range planning for higher ed in Pennsylvania, the implementation of statutory and regulatory responsibilities governing post-secondary education, and educator certification, a huge job. Before joining this post, Dr. Garcia served as the Associate Director of Post-Secondary Policy Research and as an Associate Research Professor at Georgetown University on the Center on Education and the Workforce. Prior to her work at Georgetown, she also had various roles in state government, national nonprofits, and philanthropy, where she dedicated her work in improving policies and practices for all students from high school to post-secondary into the workforce. A first-generation student herself, Dr. Garcia earned a BA in philosophy and a BS in biology at the Florida International University. Her MA is in higher education administration from the George Washington University, back to DC, and she earned her PhD in public administration at American. Thank you so much for being with us today. So now we're going to move into just starting out I'm going to pose a few questions to the panel that will then launch us into our discussion. And I'd like to start with a question for Mitzi. So Ms. Colin Lopez, from your experience and the experience of your friends and peers and family, can you help us understand the experience of undocumented students who are pursuing higher education? For example, what are some of the challenges or barriers that have you faced or others face in relation to just getting started into admissions and then obtaining the finances to be able to go into higher ed, get the tuition set, and then getting through to completing the degree? Go ahead, Mitzi.
Yeah, so from personal experience, the process starts in high school, and way before that, many undocumented students are first generation, so the opportunity to go to college is something that's like unknown territory. So in high school, even applying to colleges, it could be a barrier to see that Social Security is required as a part of the application process. That discourages a lot of students from even applying. That also raises the question, because of my status, am I eligible for in-state tuition, international student? There's not really a clear answer for that because of your status. And there's also the aspect of financial aid. As an undocumented student, you are not eligible for financial aid or student loans. And as we know, the college is very expensive. So you have to pay for the tuition out of pocket. And often there's not a lot of financial help. That takes me to my next point of scholarships. A lot of scholarships also require proof of citizenship. So that's another resource that is often unavailable for a lot of undocumented students. And even accessing private scholarships or scholarships that don't require immigration status, they're really hard to find. And that usually requires you having a connection with either your school financial aid office or somebody that's already been in that process that you can talk to about, because it's often very hard to find on your own. And then also from personal experience, I'm a DACA recipient. So because of these barriers, I had to work 2 jobs in order to pay for tuition. My parents had to also help me out as much as they could, but I didn't want to put the burden on them to pay for my schooling. So I had to work really hard to pay for my tuition. I also try to maintain a high grade point average in order to qualify for as much scholarships as I could. But it's very hard, especially knowing that it's very hard to find those resources on campus, which should not be that way. I had to find out on my own how to apply for FAFSA because I am also first generation. So I didn't really know that process, and having a mixed status family made it harder. So I had to find out on my own that process. And yeah, it can be very overwhelming not having the resources available on your campus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitzi. So given the some of these real challenges and barriers that Mitzi just highlighted, and you know, comprehensively, from the fact that it starts in high school, you know, and the fact that, as Mitzi mentioned, that, you know, many undocumented students may be first-gen students as well. So needing to, you know, navigate what could be an unfamiliar landscape, to the financial aid barriers with respect to eligibility, and, you know, finding the right resources and finding resources when you need them, you know, on campus and elsewhere. Given these myriad challenges, the next question I'd like to pose to the three other panelists, Layla, Tom, and Tanya, if you could talk a little bit about how you or your respective agencies or organizations that you're representing, how you are working to address some of these kinds of issues and challenges that were raised and that you're familiar with. If you could maybe talk a little bit about those, you know, what you're doing, what the organization is doing, that'd be great. If we could start maybe with Tom, and then go to Layla, and then finish off with Tanya.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I know Senator Schwank, this is a cause and an issue near and dear to her heart. She sends her best, but she couldn't be with us today, and she would be a much better speaker than I on these subjects, because she's been out in front on these issues. Lot going on here. Let me just say, this is kind of weird for me, because in the next room, my son is a graduate student at Westchester, and he's taking, I don't know what class he's in, but he's taking class remotely. So it's kind of weird. Dad and son are next to each other doing Zoom meetings with Westchester. But again, thank you for the opportunity. Our office has been involved in helping students access resources for higher education for many years. It's particularly a challenge to the undocumented student, as we all know. I guess first and foremost is the in-state tuition, and then the access to the financial aid. So one of the things that Senator Schwank has done the last two sessions in the General Assembly is introduce the PA DREAM Act. It was initially introduced, and I believe, in the 2014 session by a senator who's now a congressman, Lloyd Smucker from Lancaster. Senator Schwank introduced it last session as Senate Bill 35. Unfortunately, it did not pass. She has again reintroduced it this session. We're waiting for a bill number, but more than likely it's going to get referred to the Education Committee. And essentially what it does is allow students, undocumented students, to enroll in any of the publicly funded universities, community college, state-related, and PASHE schools with in-state tuition, which is, I think all the students here will know, and can be a pretty big price difference. Even for a community college, it's significant. The other piece of that is they would also be eligible for the student aid through the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, which, depending on income, could be anywhere above $4,000 a year in state grant money, which is you know, a nice contribution toward the cost of higher education. In addition to being kind of a voice in the General Assembly and a voice out in public in our own district, we also try to give opportunities to undocumented students to get real life learning and work examples in our office. We've had a number of undocumented students who have worked in our office and who have moved on to successful careers. And excellent students, excellent workers, highly motivated. All the things you want to see in the students, it's there. And for us to kind of present that opportunity really is kind of fulfilling for everybody in the office, but also I think it sets an example of how we should be, helping students move on to their future. The other thing we do, and I see one of our local advocates is on with us today, Myrna Fuchs. Myrna and I and Senator Swank have had some conversations about some of the bureaucracy that is preventing some students who fall into a certain birth date from getting, I don't want to get into the weeds on it, but from accessing FIA grants for their first year. And it's kind of a back and forth with the agency, and it seems like a little thing to surmount, but you deal with the bureaucracy and the code, and it's not an easy thing to change. And I think that there may have been some conversation with Dr. Garcia at her level. I could be wrong on that, but so we help in those situations as well. So that's essentially what we're doing. Legislatively, the other piece, and I'll throw this in, and maybe this is a little bit farther along in the conversation, but we've also introduced legislation that would allow students who have their teaching credentials and who are undocumented, or who have some type of not quite the right documentation to get the PDE certification, to get it so they can work. And many of those students want to work back in their communities where they grew up, which is particularly important today because we're seeing less teachers being certified, COVID notwithstanding, and there's really a need to get students of color to work in their communities. And the gap statistically is tremendous. I don't have the numbers at my fingertip. I don't want to bore you with that, but that's another one that we've introduced again this session. And the idea is to get qualified teachers with the skills to work in the communities and the motivation to work in those communities to be able to pursue their dreams and to help others pursue their dreams. So that's where we are, and that's what we've been doing. So yeah, that's my first kind of comment.
Thank you, Tom. Lila, would you like to address that question, essentially what you and your organization are doing to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. So for those of you who don't know CASA, we are a social justice organization, and our mission is basically improve the life of the immigrant, Latino, and working class communities here in Pennsylvania. We are member-led. That means that our members, our community members, decide what CASA is going to fight, what are going to be our campaigns and our priorities for the year, and how we're going to be doing that. So if I see that CASA is working on tuition equity, it's not because I thought that is an important issue, it's because our members decided that this is something that is going to benefit them. We decided to work on tuition equity 1.5 years ago. And it is not a coincidence that the reason why we decided to work on this was because at the same moment, our youth group started in CASA. We meet once a month, and our youth group is between 16 and 23 years old. All of them are immigrant or immigrant origin. So some of them are US born, but their parents are immigrants. And it's like all over the Pennsylvania. So you have folks from different cities coming together. And we realized in that moment that half of our group, so around 12, 13 people, we're around 25, were undocumented and were having doubts about their current situation in high school and how university was going to look like, or if they were already in university, the majority of them in community college, they were unsure about their status and what was going to happen after that. There was like a huge lack of resources and information. So as CASA, I think we've done two things. One is provide that direct service, right? Trying to help them and find them the resources that they need, connect them with that. But we soon realized that that's not enough, right? Like it's really hard to work person per person per person we realize, and this is the motto of CASA, that we need a transformation, right? We need to change the system because it is currently not working for our folks, right? So what we do, and this is what we focus most of our time and attention, at least for me as a community organizer, it's about like educating ourselves, about informing other people about what's going on, right? Because it's not just about us taking action, right? It's about other folks knowing what is happening. Most of the people that we talk that don't have a strong relationship with the immigrant community, they don't know. They do not know that you need a social security number for certain things. They do not know the difference between being undocumented and documented. They don't know about how these little things or these little nuances may affect your opportunities to thrive in life. So they are the ones who at the same time inform and raise awareness to other people, but most importantly, they are the ones who take action. Because this is our motto in CASA, right? Like our idea is not me going to Senator Schwank talking about this issue, is that people like Mitzi, or even a constituent, even better, right? Talking to state senators and representatives about why we need this happening, right? Why this is important for us. So since we started our first year, it was basically like educating ourselves, like we need to understand, right? What is the current situation right now in Pennsylvania? And I think Liliana was mentioning about the title, the PA Dream Act. Just that is super confusing. When folks think about dream, they think about dreamers. They think about federal level. They think about DACA, right? They think about young people and you know, children being brought to this country. Some of the recommendations, and I'll talk a little bit more about this if you're interested, but we are like going full steam about this topic right now as CASA Pennsylvania, and it's being led by our youth committee. One of the recommendations for young folks was to change these. Why don't we call it tuition equity and inclusivity campaign or something like this? Something that when people see that, they do understand what it is. Because DREAM Act is something that it was used, I think, as Tom mentioned, by Lord Schumacher like a few years ago. And now it's a bit confusing for people to understand what we're talking about when we say the PA Dream Act. So that was, you know, one tiny, some people may think like tiny recommendation, but this is coming from people who are gonna be benefit from it, who would feel that this legislation, even if it doesn't pass, just the fact that it has a name that really explains that for them means something, would have, you know, like a weight on it. Second thing that we are doing is assessing right now. Like we start a new year, right? And we know that we have to pass the legislation both in the Senate and in the House, right? So for example, we just started conversations with Representative Schweier, who's gonna be presenting this legislation in the House. And we talked to him because this is not the first time that he would be doing this. And we were saying, there's a few things that we believe we can do better in here. This is great. This is a great first step, but our folks, some of them would be excluded. They would not be still included in your legislation. Do you think we can do these two things so we make it more inclusive, so we make it even better, so we help more people, right? So what we are doing, our impact can be even bigger. And you know, our youth explain why this matter, why we had to make these changes. And in a private meeting, he agreed with all of them. Right? He said that would be relatively easy to put. So that's kind of like the second thing. But now we go what Tom was saying. We need to make that pass. And that's hard. That's when the hard work comes, right? Like putting legislation out there is not that difficult, especially when you have champions, when you have people that really care about these issues. But passing them, especially, you know, like it has to go through a committee. And I know we've Chester in Chester County, but for example, to pass this kind of legislation, we have the leader of the Committee of Education is Senator Scott Martin, which is in Lancaster County, our neighbors here in Chester County, right? We need to make sure that we talk to both parties, right? Because what happens with this kind of legislations is that they are seen as a partisan issue, right? Especially now when immigration is so politicized, we have to break that. We need to talk to both parties. We need to tell them that immigration is not a politicized issue. This is about people like Mitzi who are awesome, right? Who have lives, who deserve the same opportunity than anybody else. That immigration status should not make a difference, right? Because she is not gonna have, like, her impact in Pennsylvania is not gonna make a difference regardless of her immigration status, right? She's gonna pay taxes. She's gonna work as hard as any other US citizen. So that shouldn't matter when it comes to access to university, because it doesn't make a change. It doesn't matter in real life when we are working, right? So what we are focusing right now, because we feel ready, like, right, we're informed, we're educated, we had a huge base with our immigrant students and undocumented students at the forefront, but we have like all these allies, people like me, right, like supporting them, and many other people like white and Black and Puerto Ricans and all kind of folks supporting this. So we can go to these legislators and tell them why we have to pass this, why this is so important. And again, for us, I think the key is to bring people like Mitzi, right? Like they have like personal stories are so strong. This is what people connect to. And especially like this is not a partisan issue. This is a Pennsylvania issue, right? And I think like I'm very excited because we're just starting these conversations. We're just putting like all these meetings together. Actually, Tom, there's one coming your way soon. And you know, it's just like super exciting to see what we can do when we have people power, because that's what we need. People power, right? I think that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Layla. Tanya?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. And so early in my tenure, some of you might know that I began in my current role in November of last year, and have been learning all the intricacies of state state post-secondary education in the Commonwealth. And I, although I have never, really, been directly involved in making post-secondary education more accessible for undocumented students, what I do have is a lot of background and experience. For example, I began my higher education policy career in the state of New Mexico, where I was living at the time. And back in 2005, New Mexico, I think, was one of the first states to pass a law where it was not allowed to ask any student, K through 12 or post-secondary student, what their legal status was. And so New Mexico was a pioneer among the states in making undocumented students eligible for state grant and scholarship aid, in addition to having them pay resident tuition and fee rates. And so there's a handful of states who have been involved in making post-secondary education more accessible to undocumented students. I've also done research for College Promise, which is the organization that is leading in terms of both local and statewide free college programs. Several states have made undocumented students eligible for the free college program funding that in the programs that have been signed at the local and at the state level. And so that is another resource available to find out, what already exists out there and how can we learn from what other states are doing. Unfortunately, right now, colleges and universities have full discretion as to whether to allow undocumented students to pay in-state tuition and fee rates, with one exception, which is a program that we're very proud of. Undocumented students who graduate from any two of our historically Black colleges and universities, Cheney University, that's a part of the PASHE system, or Lincoln University, among the state-related institutions, they can currently apply for and take advantage of the Bond Hill Scholarship that provides, full rides for their graduates to attend graduate school or professional school. And so that those are our current policy levers that we have available for undocumented students. Of course, it's not enough. There's a lot of unmet need in terms of Cheney and Lincoln University graduates who receive Bond Hill funding. But until we have a more stable state and federal legislative backdrop, it's going to be really hard to really meet the needs of all of our students. And, I'll leave it at that and have us move on to the next question. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Tanya, so much. And I didn't disclose this to everyone else, but I used to work in a very similar position to Tanya up at the Department of Education before my tenure at Westchester began last February, before the pandemic hit. And I know firsthand how much of a mammoth post-secondary and higher education is at the state level, particularly as it concerns both the college access and affordability piece, which is really, really big and important. But the post-secondary and higher education office within the executive branch is also responsible for overseeing all things related to teacher certification and licensure, which is a lot of policy, even within that domain alone. So I know you've got your hands full, and you just got there. And so we really appreciate you being with us and sharing your perspective. Just a really quick follow-up before I turn it back over to Dr. Stevenson for our final question, and then we'll open it up to a broader Q&A. Tom, you mentioned that there are several pieces of legislation that the senator has introduced to help address some of the challenges that undocumented students are facing, both with respect to the PA DREAM Act and legislation related to teacher certification accessibility for undocumented students and individuals in Pennsylvania. I guess I'm just curious as to your thinking related to the likelihood of those pieces of legislation passing this session, and then Layla, you might be able to weigh in on this as well. If it's not able to pass this session or the next, what seems to be the biggest hurdle in getting those pieces of legislation passed? Is it, as Layla mentioned, is it really just the fact that it's such a partisan topic, a hyper-partisan topic, or are there other sort of elements for consideration as well?
Yeah, I actually was going to comment on something that Layla had said, and yes and no. So the original, I'm going to use DREAM Act in quotes because it probably doesn't accurately reflect what the legislation intends to do. And it's confusing with the full side of it as well. That you're absolutely right. But the original PA DREAM Act that Lloyd Smucker introduced, Lloyd was a Republican from Lancaster, very Republican territory, very red territory. But I think he realized with his constituency that there really was a need to take a look at this. So he introduced it, got 11 co-sponsors on it. That's 11 out of 50 senators. Not bad, but bipartisan. That's always a good indication. But the committee chairman he's kind of the gatekeeper. So if he doesn't want to move that legislation, it's not going to move. So you really have to almost build a legislative coalition, because let's not forget, it takes 26 senators to pass legislation in the Senate. Well, it could be 25-25 with the lieutenant governor casting a tie-breaking vote. But generally speaking, 26 in the Senate to pass a piece of legislation, 102 positive votes for legislation to pass it in the House of Representatives. So really, the trick is getting it out of committee. So how do you start building that up? I would suggest, and I think Layla, you made a excellent point, the personal stories of constituents and individual legislators' districts makes a big deal, because it brings it home. It says it's important to the people in my district. And therefore, I may have to kind of mitigate or lessen my ideology that may be preventing me from supporting this up front, because you know what, there is a need. So you build that rapport and you build your coalition. Start at the individual rank and file representative member. Get them to kind of take your cause. And then the next step I would suggest is engage, in addition to the constituencies and to the stakeholder groups and the advocacy groups, reach out to other partners, school districts, Reading School District, very much probably, and I may be wrong on this, 85% Hispanic. You see, they serve many undocumented students. The administrators, the teachers in that district know firsthand. They can convey another layer of message to a representative or a senator that this is something you need to look at. And then I think there's also the economic part of this as well. Talk to the local business community. Undocumented students are the new workforce, part of the workforce. They have so much to give. It becomes an economic question too. And that resonates as well with people of certain ideologies. And when you kind of meld that together, that makes a powerful argument, a powerful coalition. Now, am I naive enough to say that just doing that is going to make it happen? No, it's going to take a concerted effort. And you start now at the beginning of the session. You have 2 years to get this through before we'd have to start back at ground zero. So I would suggest that there is a possibility, but it starts at the very grassroots level. Start with your individual rank and file member, your local representative, your local senator, and then move up and build your coalition out, and then get out and talk to those representatives face to face. Much better than doing a string of form emails, I guess you'd say. We see a lot of those. And they say the same thing, and they kind of all run together, whether it's this issue or any other issue. But when you hear the personal messages, that really resonates. So that's my comment. Probably way too long on that, but anyway.
No, that's great. And I know, Layla, if you want to respond, and then I see Tanya might have something to share as well.
Yeah, no, I just think it's funny because we were planning, we were doing a strategy call this morning about this, and we were saying we need the businesses. We really need the businesses. We really need to be talking about economic terms and about the impact. One of the things when we talk about immigration, we realize, and maybe this is why, well, not always, right? But we realize that some rural communities, and legislators that represent these communities, because there is a big number of undocumented immigrants, they respond better because they do understand the demographic of their region or their district. But yeah, actually right now we are working with the Policy Budget Center because we are preparing these kind of 15-pager about what it would mean, in terms of community and economics, what it would mean to pass a tuition equity and inclusivity legislation. Because it is true, personal stories matter, they're important, and we have to gather them in numbers, but we need to make sure that we talk about economical impact, because that's gonna matter. So yeah, basically saying that everything that Tom said, I think this is something that not just CASA, but many other groups are trying to get that, because again, at the very end, you talk to representatives, like Shrunk, like many others, and sometimes they tell you, really, I can present legislation, I can try to do this, but there's no much more I can do. We need to bring other folks to the table. And about the bipartisan, no bipartisan, it is true that it was introduced by a Republican, but in the last years, we've seen how immigration has become a very polarizing topic between the two parties. So it doesn't mean that a Republican cannot support an immigration bill. No, it doesn't mean that. I think it's just much harder, I believe, right, that is now that it is 6 or 7 years ago.
Thank you, Layla. Tanya, I think you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Seth. So I think, you know, a lot of advocacy on a variety of different levels. You know, I'm not sure what the composition is here in Pennsylvania, but you know, a lot of Latinos in the United States are U.S. born, and at least those that are 40 years and under, 80% of them were born here in the United States. And so I think, you know, in the communities where there's a mix of U.S. and foreign born, I think there's a lot more advocacy that can be done among all groups, not just, you know, Latinos rooting for Latinos here, but I think it's really important to disaggregate you know, what the need is, and really you know, have a more nuanced conversation about you know, and you know, as Mitzi mentioned, you know, there are mixed status families as well, right? So there's a lot that can be done about, you know, raising awareness about different populations of, you know, who's documented or not, and you know, go beyond the Latino community as well, because obviously it affects other immigrants as well. So I just wanted to mention that, you know, it's really important to keep those demographic, you know, data in mind as we, you know, try to increase advocacy for different groups. You know, I'm an immigrant, but I grew up in the U.S. and so I think it's, you know, it's important for people like me who have been in the U.S. for a long time to also be advocates for, you know, newer immigrants. And you know, I grew up in Miami, Florida, and you know, there were a lot of Cuban immigrants that were arriving, and Haitian immigrants, and so that's, you know, that's part of my, you know, 2 cents here on what we can do as a broader community of, you know, support and advocacy.
Thank you, Tanya. And I think that all of you started helping, you all started to help address, I believe, what Dr. Stevenson's next question alludes to. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Stevenson for our final question for the panel, and then I think we can open it up for a broader Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. So just really kind of building off of what most of you are beginning to allude to is, you know, what are ways in which we who are listening to this panel or have contacts related to, you know, in my classes or in community networks, as student leaders, college staff and administration, what do you think we can be doing in terms of taking actions to continue to support our undocumented students or those who are interested in getting into higher ed? Let's see, how about it? Tana, do you want to start? And then Tom and then Leila? Is that going backwards this time? No, thanks.
Sorry, did you say my name first? Oh, okay. Sure, I'd be happy to. Okay, so there's, you know, while we wait for Senator Schrenk's Senate Bill 165 to make it through committee and for at the federal level for the Federal DREAM Act, which was introduced by Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, and Senator Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, to go through that process as a part of a comprehensive national immigration reform act. There are a few, you know, tools we have at our disposal. They're not necessarily state driven or state directed, but you know, colleges award various amounts of institutional aid, right? That they get either from their own foundations or, you know, from other sources of funding from private individuals. I think that is an untapped resource in terms of providing post-secondary educational access and opportunity for undocumented students. And so that comes down to how they define eligibility rules for their aid programs and how they, whether they include residency as part of that eligibility. The other example that I have from when I lived in Indianapolis, the state of Indiana has pretty good participation of private philanthropy in creating scholarships for students that is not based on documented status. And that is how many states are approaching making tuition and fees less of a barrier for undocumented students. I don't know the details of whether or not those tuition and fees are applied as if they were international students or not, but private funding from foundations at the local and regional level are certainly a source of funding for students. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much. Tom, yeah.
Sure. So a couple of things, especially with regard to the students, the age group 17 to 23. This goes back to my days in college many decades ago. I always voted and I was always interested in politics, but a lot of my friends and my classmates, not so much. Today, more than ever, I think, especially when you're advocating for controversial issues, which this is, especially the way it's been framed in terms of immigration, students themselves can have a very powerful voice in reaching out. And it's great for, older folks like us in our positions to be a voice for that. But to hear it from the young people, those that are the most impacted by it, can speak to the real life impacts and their passion, that needs to be injected. Legislators need to hear that. Policymakers need to hear that. And it really does make a difference. It's not just voting, it's also having your voices heard by reaching out. Layla also mentioned about how the polarization of the immigration issue has almost made this a Democrat-Republican type setup, for lack of a better term. If you look around the state of Pennsylvania, we'd have to admit that you're just not going to get certain legislators represented. They're not going to vote for it. It's not in their constituency. It's not in their ideology. However, to generate the bipartisanship, you can look around certain areas of the state, Lancaster County, for example, Allentown, Lehigh Valley, Harrisburg area, Allegheny County, maybe even Erie, certainly the Southeast, where you have strong communities of immigrant communities where there be significant undocumented amounts of residents, students. You'll have Republican representatives there. They will listen. Much easier for them, more likely for them to listen to the cause, let's say, or the idea of supporting tuition equity embodied in the PA DREAM Act. And again, I'll use that term in quotes, because it's their part of their constituency. And if they're doing their jobs well, they will represent their constituency's interest. And that is part of the interest of their constituency. So I would see a good opportunity for reaching out in areas, even Berks County. We have another senator who's a Republican, reasonable guy, who represents the other side of Berks. Lehigh County is represented in the state Senate by another Republican. I think there would be fertile ground there to kind of get them on board. Same thing with the House delegations in those areas. So that's another kind of a strategy that I would suggest would work in kind of building a bipartisan coalition. Again, it's not easy. It may take a while, but I think there's enough opportunity to get to that magic 102 number in the House and that 26 number in the Senate and get it on the governor's desk. Of course, we have to get through the committee chairman, but again, you know, if enough of their members are saying, hey, this is a good idea, maybe they'll go along with it. So those are my 2 comments on that.
Tom, just a quick follow-up intervening there in terms of the recent change of, I don't know how much there was a change of the guard, right, locally, but do you see it as a, is it a fertile moment right now because of some of the changes from the elections, or not so much? And also changing demographics, like you mentioned, Lehigh Valley and Reading, like, you know, it's completely changed over the last decade. So in order for some of our representatives and senators to kind of get up to speed, I think and Layla, I'm sure you're going to address this, but like, you know, this is a new time, you know, like this is a different kind of constituency than you had 10 years ago.
I think definitely in the southeast part of the state, you've seen kind of a turnover, so to speak, in thinking. So I would imagine for the most part, the delegation, and I'll use that term loosely to encompass maybe Philadelphia County and the 4 suburban counties. For sure, you'll have backing there, I would think. Maybe if they don't sign on to the bill, maybe they would vote for it if given a chance to vote for it on the floor. But certainly in those cities that I mentioned, those constituencies, you know, the demographic changes, and the demographics are you know, it's moving outside the cities. It's not just in the cities. The inner ring suburbs are changing demographically. So when that happens, you're going to have you know, maybe Republican representation in those suburban areas. Then it becomes more of interest to them because that's part of their constituency. So I think from a political standpoint, there is merit in them listening just from future elections, but also from the standpoint of good policy. You know, this works well for the people I represent, but it also works well for the Commonwealth and for our local community and for our local economy. So, you know, if I were a Democrat assessing how we did in Pennsylvania in the last election, I said, not so good. But that doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity, and those that have been Republicans that have been elected won't listen, because I think it almost comes to the point that they have to. And I don't want to be partisan there, but you know, there's certain, you have to listen to the folks you represent in order to do your job and to do your well.
Yeah, thanks.
So.
And they do, right? Like we as CASA, we are in central Pennsylvania, right? Where the cities, it is true, we have a Democrat, normally a representative, but the rest, like you look at your county, where you have one representative who's Democrat, the whole county is Republican. Same thing in Lancaster. Same thing, for example, in Dauphin County, which is Harrisburg. So we are very used to talk to Republicans, and it is true. We are constituents. We ask for a meeting, they give it to us, and we do talk to them, and they do listen. Maybe they don't pass it, and we never talk about this specific issue, but we've talked about minimum wage. We've talked about other issues that were important to our members. So, you know, I do feel like it's not like they don't even grant us a meeting, right? Like we do have the opportunity to be there. And this is why, like, I would say to people, like, educate yourself, but most importantly, educate others, right? This is not just an immigrant issue, right? Like, yes, immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, are gonna be at the forefront. And the rest of us as allies, we are gonna support them, right? We're gonna be pushing from the back, right? That's gonna be our leadership. Well, they are the faces of this movement. But it is not just on them. You know, we have to make them sure that we are there for wherever they need. And it is important that we educate others, like where I live, and all my friends, my husband's friends are Republican. And, you know, if like their faces, when I explain about how the current immigration system works, they can't believe it. They're like, are you seriously telling me it's so hard to be here legally? And I'm like, yes, it's really, really hard. I explain my story. I'm married to a US citizen and I was undocumented. married to a US citizen. They thought that just when you get married, they give you the green card. No, 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 right? You have to go through the whole process. And sharing your story if you have one, but even if you don't, if you know, like, even if you can say what you've learned, what you've seen, how important this is to you, and that we connect our issues, oh my goodness, like, you know, in Pennsylvania, we talk a lot about the Latino vote, and this is what Tom was saying about voting. Yeah, voting is very important, but even if you cannot vote, I am not a US citizen, I can vote. But I always say, I create at the very least 50 votes per year. Why? Because I knock doors. I go to all my Puerto Rican friends and I say, hey, you are US citizens. You can vote, you know, register to vote. And I don't talk on partisan terms. I talk about the power of our vote, about the changes that we can make to make a Pennsylvania that work for all of us. All of us. I don't care, you know, no race, no immigration, no gender, nothing, no like LGBTQ, like for all of us. It shouldn't matter who you are, right? And for me, like our best allies are Puerto Ricans. They are the ones who are like, when they do their vote, when in Pennsylvania or in this 2020, you know, their priorities for going voting were about like, I want to vote for like climate justice, right? Like they understand that very well because of Hurricane Maria and having to migrate. But they understand as well that we are together. They have the privilege of being a US citizen, but when it comes to like establishing yourself in a new land, in a new territory where you don't speak the language, we go together. We face the same obstacles. And I think like creating these coalitions where it's not your cause or it is not my cause, like we are connected and it is our cause, this is super, super powerful. So I would encourage you all to join organizations that and institutions that fight for this, to think about how can I be a good ally or how can I use my voice. Right? Voting, it is important, but it is not the end. And we know that, right? Some people may be very happy about how 2020 turned out. Some people are not that happy. But regardless of that, if we don't hold our leaders accountable, if we don't take action to make sure that they do why, for the reason we put them there to, we have nothing. And the last thing I'll say is that the immigrant, I've been in this country for 4 years and a half, so my historical knowledge is not that great. But from what I've heard, the immigrant movement hasn't been as strong as we are right now. We've learned a lot in the last, I don't know, 12, 14 years. You know, having this person being a Democrat or the other doesn't count if we as a movement, we are not ready to create the proper narrative, how we talk about ourselves. You know, we cannot be saying good immigrants, bad immigrants. No, no, no. You know, how we frame our priorities. We cannot be saying it is your thing. Oh, this is my thing. This is more important. The other one is more important. No, we cannot be talking about that. Like the fact that how much we've learned and how ready we are, it gives me tons of hope about victories. I don't know if this year, maybe not this year, maybe the next one, but I'm telling you, I myself and all CASA members are here for the long haul. We are not gonna stop this year, regardless if we pass tuition equity or we don't pass. You know, even if we pass an immigration reform or we don't pass it, we are here for the long haul. And we are not here just for immigration issues. We are here to increase the minimum wage. We are here to make sure that our air and our water are clean. You know, I'm here to make sure that we have good funding in schools for children like mine, you know, where your zip code doesn't determine the opportunities that you have. So what we are creating, it is much bigger than sometimes what we see. So please join as much as you can. Like as an advocate, some people are like, you know what, I'll just donate. That's fine too. I donate to a lot of people, right? That are in Texas, and I don't even know where Texas is, to be honest. In the South. You know, I think like just do whatever your capacity and your energy allows you, but do something. If it's voting is cool. But if you can do more than that, we, movement like CASA, are gonna welcome you with open hearts and open arms, because this movement needs all of us, because we're fighting for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Really quickly, I know we want to open this up to Q&A, but I would be remiss not to see if Mitzi has any response to this question related to that which we can start doing to address some of the challenges and obstacles that undocumented students are facing. I think we talked a lot about some of the things that we could and should really start doing at the broader sort of public policy level. And I really appreciate all of the wisdom and insights and recommendations that have been made for engaging in that broader sort of public space and as it pertains to public policy. Mitzi, I'm wondering, and certainly if you have anything to add to that, but also wondering as someone that works at a university, and I know that there are several others here that work at universities, are there things that you see that need to be sort of addressed with respect to administrators and faculty and staff when it comes to what folks and peers, what folks can be doing at the university level to help address some of the challenges?
Yeah, so I know we talked about this briefly, like how your voice really can be impactful. Like I may not have the power to vote, but whenever I can, I use my voice to educate other people and raise awareness. So whenever I can talk about it in the classroom, I'll do that and educate my peers, or even when I have a closer relationship with a professor or a faculty or staff, I let them know that there's a lot of barriers that we face, and it really all comes down to educating yourself and being an ally. Like Laila mentioned, there's power in numbers, and people often don't know all the struggles that we face. Like I mentioned earlier, there's certain things that we can't do, like we can't study abroad, even for internships or volunteering. Professors might not realize that if you're an undocumented student, you may not even be able to volunteer because you don't have a social security number to pass a background check, which many volunteer or internships require. Study abroad, you can't do that as well because of your status. So I feel like as faculty and staff and professors, they kind of should have the part to educate themselves in this issue, because undocumented students are here. You may not know who they are, but they're here, and it really means a lot when I see like professors or staff at meetings like this trying to educate themselves on the topic.
Thanks, Mitzi.
Thank you so much, Mitzi. I think we want to turn it over to Liliana to facilitate any open Q&A.
Yes, thank you, panelists, for this informative session. We again thank you for being here. So really quick before we start the Q&A, I did have a resource to share. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's a link to a Google Drive folder with resources for immigrants and undocumented students. And what I can do is also share that out for anyone that had to leave early. I can email all the registrants. But in there, one thing I wanted to highlight is you'll see there's a document called Additional Resource List, and there will be a link to sign up for a newsletter so that you can continue receiving information and resources from the Dowdy Multicultural Center. So go ahead and sign up for that to get continuing information. And then, yes, we do have a couple of questions that were posed. This one's fairly quick for you, Laila. Is CASA working with PIC on this issue of access for college access for undocumented students?
Yes, PIC is awesome. They are the Pennsylvania Immigration Coalition here in PA, and basically like a bunch of groups who are member-led or community-based work, under their umbrella. So CASA is part of PIC. There's like groups like Make the Road that are part of PIC. Casa San Jose, Casa de la Cultura. So we have folks from Philly, from Pittsburgh. Yeah. And all the work that we do into issue and equity, we do report back to them and do it always in coordination with them because the whole idea, as I mentioned before, is to have a unified movement.
Thank you. And also in the resources, there is a link to some of the actions that PIC is taking. I know that they have some sort of coalition going on if people are interested. So someone had a comment for Mitzi. The question is, how do you leverage SGA and PASHE student voices on this issue?
I'm confused as to what the question is. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, it was a little confusing. Let me try to phrase it.
You want me to give a little context for it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm involved with student government, Mitzi. I'm actually the legislative affairs senator, and something that we've been doing is trying to kind of leverage student voices more. It's kind of untapped student potential that we really haven't, we haven't seen a lot of unity within PASHE. And I know right now, as we speak, several Senate positions for students at Westchester are open regarding multicultural affairs, and a lot of, minority voices are not being leveraged within SGA. And though we have direct connections with PASHE, I know a lot of current senators and representatives are trustees on for PASHE, or are alumni of PASHE institutions that if we can leverage student voices at other universities as well to make sure they're having these same conversations that we're having right here today, I think we can make a big impact with that. So I just wanted to kind of put that feeler out for you as far as how we can right here at Westchester kind of branch out both on our campus through things like SGA and through the DM like that, but also with PASHE. So I was just, you had any plans to kind of take that to that next level here?
Yeah, so actually, I was working with the DMC over the summer and some other students on campus because we do realize that other schools in the PASHE system, they also have undocumented students. They're not on record, but we know they exist. So I actually went through the summer, I contacted all the PASHE schools, and I tried to get like a sort of resource to how to access these groups, because with me and several other students on campus, we want to organize some type of undocumented student group at this campus. So it's just difficult because that's never been done before, at least not that I know of. And when I talked to these other, like the PASHE schools, they didn't really have an answer to that, but that's definitely something that I am interested in doing. It kind of stopped because school started and just a lot of things going on, but that's definitely something I want to look into further.
Thank you both for that discussion. This question, maybe some of us can actually discuss it. I know some of us know the answer to this, but it's good to let the group know. So the question is, besides DACA recipients, is Westchester University or any university allowed to accept students without legal status? And so Westchester is part of the PASHE system. And maybe, would you want to speak about this, maybe Seth or Denise? I know we know a little bit of information because of putting the panel together.
Actually, go ahead, Seth.
No, I was going to say I'm not in any way an authority on the topic, and I'm a bit rusty on current regulation and policy related to the PASHE institutions and their requirements around citizenship versus domicile. Tom might know, not to popcorn too much, but if you don't, I can try to dig up a couple of resources while we're finishing up. Oh, it looks like we have a participant who knows. You can unmute yourself and feel free.
Okay, I've been working with undocumented students for years, and I have been very successful for the most part of getting them money to go to college. I would like to see more teachers and counselors trained in how to do that. One thing is PASHE schools is domicile. You can be undocumented and have domicile. We have more of an issue with our local community college because it depends on how you define it, domicile, and they are charging our kids $11,000 a year to go to community college, which is ridiculous. There are sources and more sources now. Now our local community has created what we call a local scholarship for undocumented kids. We should see more of this throughout the state because national scholarships are always so hard to get. Now, there are a few, if you have an excellent student, like the Golden Door, which really funds a great deal, or if you have an excellent student, the PASHI schools will give a board of governors to an undocumented student, which makes a heck of a lot of difference. That's full tuition. We have our local Alvernia College that gives money through a Reading Collegiate Scholars, full tuition to Reading kids. Well, we have several over the years, undocumented students going there and getting full tuition. So there are sources out there, and there needs to be more people sitting down and helping these kids. We always have, and I'm part of an organization called the Greater Reading Immigration Project. It's a volunteer organization. We have yearly summits, which we haven't had this year. And we're now doing a lecture series, which the acting assistant secretary of post-secondary school will also be joining us that day. There are issues as simple as certification. What kind of things can we do? I have a young lady who graduated from Kutztown, passed all her exams, and when she went to get her certification, said, forget it. You're not a permanent resident or a citizen, you can't have it. Now, I know Senator Schwank's office has tried, but isn't there something we can do at the policy level? It seems getting things through legislation is almost impossible. The other thing is this issue with FIA. If you are documented and you're a citizen, but your parents are not documented, and you're not 18 years old, supposedly you won't get a FIA grant. Now, I was talked to people at FIA, and that's how they see it. And I said, well, how do you find those kids? They said, oh, it's read through the FAFSA. They're red tagged or whatever red flagged. But, you know, I checked with one of my students the other day who last year was only 17, documented and parent undocumented. And she did get the FIA grant. And I think it's the way I'm filling it out, which may be, you know, kind of getting around the system, not on purpose. But more people should know about that. And I'm trying to get a group together who will fight this FIA thing or give us more support. And I'm wondering what we can do at the policy level. Just like at the federal government, they can't get anything through legislation. What can we do to change policies? You know, I've been doing this for years. We have all sorts of tapes and things of our wonderful students who have been undocumented, have presented themselves. It just doesn't seem to work. I'm being very negative, but this is like many, many years of effort. Maybe we can do more on the policy level. And that's where I would call on the secretary, deputy secretary who's with us, to try to start making some easy changes, if not easy, but some changes. Like the thing with FIA, you have to be 18 by the time you complete your FAFSA. How about 18 by May 1st when the FIA grant is due? That would make almost all our seniors who turn 18 in their senior year eligible.
Thank you. Linda, did you want to say something? And then we should wrap up.
If we decide at some point to have a follow-up to this, that it might be helpful to bring in admissions from Westchester and or other PASHI schools to talk a little bit about how in-state tuition is being offered to undocumented students. And so that's, I think, for a future session.
I just wanted to chime in. Sorry, my dogs were barking the first time. I am from admissions. So, and we can certainly, there's a lot to say. So I'll just kind of keep it brief. And Myrna obviously covered some of that too, as far as the domicile and residency piece not being an issue. It's not a barrier to acceptance. It comes in more on that financial aid in-state tuition side. There is supposed to be some uniformity across the state system as to how we deal with undocumented students or students that have DACA status. As far as that in-state tuition, unfortunately, because there's no official policy, it gets lost a lot, and you might get different answers depending on what institution, sadly, you might get different answers depending on what institution you talk to. But again, no student is going to be denied admission on the basis of their residency or domicile.
Thank you. Yeah, the PASHE schools are doing a good job, luckily. Okay, well, I think that's all the time that we have. We went over a little bit, but we really appreciate all of you joining and, you know, having interest in tackling this issue. Like I said, I will email out to all the registrants the link that I shared with resources. And now you have resources here. Some people that spoke up today, you know, maybe reach out and try to work with them on their initiatives. Start your own. We encourage you to you know, do anything that you can to support our undocumented students. So with that, I will close out. We'll stop recording. And anyone—
Liliana, can you just let us know how people can obtain the recording if they want to?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I can send that out in the email as well, but we will post the recording to the Dowdy Multicultural Center's YouTube channel, as well as the Center for Civic Engagement and Social Impacts YouTube channel. I can't promise exactly when we'll have that up, but as soon as we can in the next few days, we will put that up. But yeah, thank you for that reminder.